Hi everyone, today I will present the essential repertoire for intermediate pianists. So I did this video some time ago where I covered repertoire that every aspiring or semi-professional pianist should know, and because there were many comments asking for a lighter version of that video, I am now making a version which I would call the intermediate repertoire. For me personally, that means it's somewhere in the middle between a complete beginner and a professional, but still easier than, let's say, the advanced level. And for those of you who are familiar with the Henle rating scale, the repertoire in this video is going to be about a Henle 6 rating, which I think is pretty fair for intermediate. Feel free to use this video as some kind of repertoire guide for you, because expanding your repertoire is always the best way to improve. By the way, the images of the editions you will see on the screen are not my recommendations. Instead, head over to the description of this video and you will always find a link to which edition I actually used or recommend. So first we have Bach, because I think everyone should know some Bach, and before you think, oh no, I don't want to play Bach, I need to tell you that Bach is basically the foundation of almost everything that came after him. I mean, it's really essential to know some Bach, and if you want to improve as a classical pianist, you need to become better at a lot of things, and Bach can help you with some of those things. So for Bach, I would suggest the French Suite number 5, which is very famous, and then the English Suite number 3. So Bach wrote 6 French and 6 English suites, and how Bach's biographer wrote, the ones were written in a French manner and the others in an English manner. However, they actually mostly follow Bach's traditional style, which is largely the Italian style. I think Bach is just an essential to have in your repertoire. It doesn't mean that you always have to be playing some Bach at any given time, but at least try to cover your basics and play 1 or 2 suites. Anyways, I think Bach is great because you can work on a number of things like polyphony, counterpoint, articulation, rhythm, memorization, and many other aspects. Also, you can of course just choose any prelude and fugue from the Well-Tempered Clavier, Book 1 or 2, although Book 2 is generally considered harder, but I would just like to remind people that there is a lot of repertoire by Bach besides the Well-Tempered Clavier. Scarlatti is also a great choice, and he's also a Baroque composer, and his sonatas are very short, usually 2 or 4 pages long, and include some kind of technical theme or main aspect in each sonata. So you can work on a lot of things, including your technique with Scarlatti, and here's a list of some sonatas you can look at. First we have Haydn, which I think is kind of the foundation for Viennese classical style, which Beethoven also later used, and of course Haydn was also one of Beethoven's teachers and mentors. So here are 2 Haydn sonatas I recommend that fall into the Henle 6 range and are about intermediate difficulty. Then we add some Mozart to our list of repertoire, and Mozart sonatas are always challenging because they need to have a certain character but cannot explode in sound like a Beethoven sonata, for example. There are certain mannerisms and rules of performing that are very traditional, so here are some sonatas I would say that fall into the intermediate category or about a Henle 6 rating. Next we have Beethoven, and the difficulty for his sonatas vary a lot, as we know, so I will give you some suggestions for intermediate pianists. We have the Opus 2 number 1, the Opus 10 number 1, you can also do Opus 14 1 or 2 and the Pathétique Opus 13. Next we have some Schubert, and his impromptus and moments musicaux are the pieces I recommend to you. So the impromptus are 4 very beautiful pieces that have improvisational style, and they're very hard to interpret beautifully, of course, just like any other piece on this list, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try them. Technically they are very doable for someone who's intermediate, and either way you don't have to play all of them. Instead you can pick your favorite and work on that one. The same goes of course for the moments musicaux, which have variation in their difficulty, and you might be familiar with the very famous 3rd or 4th piece from this opus. And now for the Romantic era we have some Chopin, and Chopin of course everyone's favorite. So first we have the Opus 64, which has 3 waltzes, and they're super famous and quite approachable. I can recommend to you, for example, the Minute Waltz, but you can just choose another waltz from this opus. And I can also recommend learning a polonaise, for example, which is in my opinion the easiest one, or one of the easiest one, is the Polonaise Opus 40 number 1, also known as the Military. To work on your technique, you can also do Opus 10 number 3 from his etudes, or Opus 10 number 9, or 25-1, 25-2. Before we continue this list, a short self-promotion. I have now channel memberships that give you access to some members-only posts and also my previous live streams and also some upcoming members-only live streams. And you can also support my channel and get a shout-out in every video. Schumann has also some fantastic choices, such as the Arabesque in C major, Opus 18, and the Blumenstück, Opus 19, which are often played together. And the Papillon, Opus 2, which I can highly recommend. It's a very enjoyable cycle of 12 small pieces, which are very different in character and technique, but they're mostly waltzes. For Brahms, I can recommend the Rhapsody Opus 79, which has 2 pieces, and I would recommend you play the second one because the first one is a bit harder. And then from Opus 118, there are basically 6 pieces in that opus, but you need to be careful with that difficulty. And also, I disagree with Henle's rating on that one, because I think they said the 6th piece is only about a 6 in difficulty, and that's just completely not true. I would recommend you learn maybe the 2nd and 3rd. They are very difficult in terms of musicality, but not difficult in terms of technique. So try the 2nd and 3rd and see if you can deal with it. So for Liszt, I can recommend his Liebesträume, which are basically nocturnes. They're also very popular and probably you have already played some of them, especially the 3rd one. Next up is Rachmaninoff, and I can recommend some preludes like the Prelude Opus 3 number 2, which you probably already know, the Prelude Opus 23 number 1, Opus 23 number 4, which is just one of my favorites, and the Prelude Opus 23 number 6. Tchaikovsky's Seasons are an amazing collection of pieces that can be performed as a whole, but you can also just learn 1 or 2 months from it. For example, January, which is At the Fireside, October, which is the Autumn Song, and July, the Song of the Reaper. Scriabin. So with Scriabin, there isn't really much repertoire that falls into the Henle 6 rating, or I think even into the Henle 7 rating, but there's one etude that is definitely the easiest by Scriabin, and you can get a first contact with Scriabin, so I would recommend doing the Opus 8 number 2 etude. It's by no means easy, but I think the easiest Scriabin piece. And lastly, if you haven't already, you can learn some Debussy. I would recommend as a good start to learn from Preludes Book 1, the number 10, La Cathédrale Engloutie, which is the Sunken Cathedral, a piece that mainly revolves around chords. And I can also recommend the Valse Romantique, which is a short waltz in F minor. So I hope you enjoyed this list of repertoire. I hope it gave you some ideas, some inspirations. If there's any questions, just let me know in the comments. And if you want to get a lesson, check the link in the description, also one-on-one coaching. And of course, if you want to become a channel member, you can support me.